Hello everyone, I'm Kirsten Alling with Gravitate Solutions, and we're going to go ahead and get started. This is being recorded, so if you miss something, we'll send out a link where you can download the recording after the presentation. A little bit of housekeeping. Everyone is on mute, so we can record it and have it, but there is a chat section if you have a question, and I will probably get to those more towards the end of the presentation as we go through. In addition, we have posted the handouts to the webinar too, and so they're in your kind of flyout menu that you have from GoToWebinar. There's a link to the handouts. And if you can't hear me or anything, also please put that in the chat. I have Lindsay along with me, and she is monitoring it and making sure we are all good to go. Without further ado, this is our presentation on auto-pay membership. So what is auto-pay membership? This is a long-standing feature that's been available in netFORUM for quite some time. It's a feature where members can go and designate a credit card or ACH account to charge when their membership is up for renewal. They are designating a specific account, and they can designate a different one by membership as well. I did want to make sure that these slides were kind of training materials, if you will, so they do have screenshots and a little bit more breadcrumbs than I would traditionally do in a presentation, but hopefully that's helpful. So I wanted to go over the starting up of just how to actually designate a membership is available for autopay. So here you have an individual's profile. It can also be an organization's profile, and we just want to get to that membership. So from the membership tab, I go ahead and I navigate over to that membership. On our next step, we're on the membership profile, and we're just going to go ahead and click on that edit icon. That opens up a pop-up, and so I wanted to make it nice and simple with the screens of the steps to do. But on that edit membership form, we're just clicking on that auto pay checkbox. And once you do that, the form will post back, it'll refresh, and you'll have a drop-down where you can select a stored payment if that's what you're doing, or if you wanted to add a new payment method on the fly with the customer on the phone, you can do that too by just clicking on the add icon. So relatively simple and kind of adding it to an existing membership. Somebody calls in and wants to be added to that program. That's how you would do it. If you're processing a new join with somebody on the phone, be sure to ask them if they'd like to join the program at the time. It'll save you some work a little bit down the road as far as collecting that information. So when you're selling them, this happens to be a screenshot from centralized order entry and then selecting add membership. But the same checkbox is available if you went through the add membership wizard as well. But it's just this little checkbox that says auto pay membership. And what netFORUM will do is once you save that membership, you make sure that you're paying it with a credit card or ACH. It captures that particular payment method, and that's what it's storing with the membership, and that's what it will charge on the renewal. So I made the mention of it storing the payment method, the credit card information. Assuming that we are using tokenization, it is storing the token. So we're not capturing the specific credit card number. Of course, we don't want to be doing that. We're storing that token, and that's what we're recharging. So while this feature has been around for quite some time, one of the reasons I think that some people did not go into it earlier, it really came down to the concern about storing some of that credit card information. So this membership renewal process, setting it up and designating a member, relatively simple from the iWeb perspective. eWeb, I will fully say, is a little bit behind still, so you will need to add that functionality to your website if you want to allow people to go in and sign in for the auto pay. And I have I touch on a little bit more on some communication that you might want to consider in that a little bit later on. But what I talked about before was all in iWeb, and it has been available for a long time, so you should be able to find that easily now. As for renewal, this is kind of the place where that designation really comes into play. If you are implementing autopay, it really is going to make a change on how you do renewals, because it is going to force you now to do renewals by query. What that means is that, and I'll go through again the steps a little bit later, you're going to use the renew to query to pull up all of your autopay memberships. And of course, you want to be charging them closer to expiration date. If you're an organization that usually runs renewal process, say 3 months out to send out those statements, you don't want autopays caught into that grouping, because you don't want to charge them that far out. They'll think that's a little odd. The renewal process, just to keep in mind, for the non-autopays, of course, it creates the pro forma invoice. For the autopay members, though, it's creating the invoice and immediately charging the credit card and applying the payment. So that's, again, why we want them separate. We also want them into their own batch, their non-pro forma batch, for that reason. I mentioned optionally you will also need to use the renew by query to create your renewals ahead of time. Again, that's only if that's your current process of creating the renewal invoices ahead of time. I know some organizations renew when they receive payment, and that's perfectly fine too. You don't need to worry about those, but you do need to run the renewal process for the auto pays. So we're back into some screenshots to help walk through how we would do this renew by query. So the first stop is that we do need to create a query. And I tried to keep it simple. We're going to start with going to the membership module, and you click on the members group item, and then you query members. To renew by query, you have to have a query that's based off of members in the membership module. The first condition that I added to my query was really just saying, is this membership on autopay? And that's just that checkbox. So I'm showing here my condition, autopay membership, the operator is, and it's checked off. My next condition was I was looking at an expire date. If you want to put in a range, you can certainly use an operator of is greater than, is less than. But by and large, I see customers with using the last day of the month, for instance. So that's why I stuck with is equal to. I did put mine as an ask at runtime parameter so that I could use the same query each time, especially if you are an anniversary group. So you don't have to change the query each month. So what this query is looking to do is it's looking to find everybody who is expiring. We'll pretend that we're on anniversary membership, and I'll say everybody who's expiring at the end of this month. So I would put in 9/30/2017. One thing we will want to, where was my chain of thought? Keep in mind are other conditions that perhaps you might want to add to the query. So if you wanted to make a smaller group of your members to renew, you can put them in your association. You can put in another condition for member type. Maybe you want to make sure that you are billing and putting in, say, everybody who's auto paying by Visa in one particular batch, and then you run the auto pays for Discover and Amex into another batch. You can do that. You would just add those as different query conditions and then put them into different batches. Some folks may also want to limit the results if they wanted to come up with a smaller batch and refine them by looking at the customer state or anything else that you can use to segment things to get the payment down to a smaller grouping if you have any business practices around wanting to have batches that have payments of, say, no more than 500 payments or something like that. So those are some of your business rules. Going back, I had my thought of the expire date that I wanted to touch on here. The reason that I have the expire date in here is for auto pay, and I'm looking at just this end of month, is I want to find the members who are currently expiring. All of those that are successful, their expire date is automatically going to push forward into next year. And so that's great. Anybody who fails, though, their expiration date will not change. And so I can reuse this query on some of my failed members or failed renewals. And I'll get to those in a little bit as well. As far as our next step that we have coming up, go to my next slide. You go ahead and you run the query. And when you're on the query, then you get some list results. From the list results, you'll notice that I've kind of highlighted it here. You click on the action icon, and then you go ahead and select renew the list. So that's pulling everybody that's coming up from your query and putting them into your renewal. And then from there, if you're used to using that renewal process, it's the same process. The top section gets taken away from you. So you can no longer select your member type in your association. That was all done in your query. And instead, it tells you the number of records that are in your result. And then we have to select the same required fields that we always have to. So we select our batch, the terms, which is required even if it was technically trying to create pro forma, and then our task start time. And of course, I generally try to put that at a minimum 3 minutes in the future, ideally probably 5+. This first task is really just doing the get records. So sometimes people will run that during the day, and that's fine. Kind of depends on your load. I did want to make kind of these highlights, and I did get wordy on this one just because they are my rules to live by. When you are doing the renewal process, when you're selecting that batch, again, make sure that you're not selecting a pro forma batch for those renewals that you're running on auto pay, because they're going to be paid memberships at the end of the day. You want to make sure that you can immediately close that batch and process the cash as you would any other real payment that's coming in. The other part to remember is that the renewal process, especially for those who don't run it as often, it is a two-step process. The first step just gets the record. The second step that I'll show you on the next slide has a button to create the renewal invoices. That's the step that sometimes organizations want to push into after hours, because it is creating an invoice and a payment, and it's going through as many records as you pulled back in your select. So it can be a little bit more onerous. The third one that I have, and I did highlight it on the next slide too, is also a reminder. After you run the process and after the invoices get created, and it's getting created for our successful auto pays, there is a button to remove records with no renewal invoice. And I find this a frequently forgotten button. But what that does is it frees up any of your failed renewals so you can try to renew them again in a process a bit later. So if the credit card fails, for instance, insufficient funds, anything like that, we want to make sure that those invoices don't get created and they live to be renewed another day. So here is that screenshot that I was mentioning as far as showing our query, and at the bottom I have my create renewal invoices button and the ever important remove records with no invoices, just to make it nice and clear. So if you currently create renewal invoices, that is an SOP that you will need to change, a standard operating procedure that you will need to go ahead and update. Because now you're running renew by query for your auto pays. That means that for your non-auto pay members, they also now need to be run through renew by query. You'll continue to run those ahead of time. You just need to make sure that you're only running the renewals on those memberships that don't have the auto pay selection. So it's just kind of a little reverse of that one condition. You want to say you're looking for auto pay is not checked, to go ahead and run those. Now, some things to keep in mind. So that was kind of the mechanics and the how-tos of setting somebody up and actually doing the renewals. This is the business side, which I think is a little bit more of the challenging side when it comes to auto pay. And it really comes down to the queries, which is a segmentation, and then communicating as much as possible ahead of time to folks, just to let them know that you now have the program available, what it means, and that sort of thing. So we talked already about the queries to go and find the auto pays and the non-auto pays, and you can use those same queries for your communication as well. The things that you'll want to keep in mind are your typical reminders that you have for the non-auto pays. We have our first notice, second notice, third notice, final notice, that sort of thing. Those can continue on. For the auto pays, I generally find having a communication going out, a couple of them ahead of time, saying, just a reminder, you're signed up for this auto pay and we're going to bill you on such and so date. and give them a way to let you know if they want to opt out or if they need to change their credit card information or anything like that. We'll also talk a little bit in a second also about finding some of those, doing a little bit of data check to make sure that you have valid credit card information for the folks, doing that ahead of time so that you can start to collect those updates will be helpful to you when you run the process. So that's another query data check to add to your list. The other ones that we'll talk about more too about keeping in mind the failed credit cards. It happens. There's some system options that we'll need to set up and manage, and also some things with our payment processors that give them some additional options. So the preparation, before we even get into communication, some good business rules about when are we actually going to bill our customers for their auto pay membership. It shouldn't be something that we're deciding every month when we're about to do renewals. It's something that we need to schedule out and make sure is also part of our communication, telling people ahead of time, you're signing up for this. This is the day that I'm going to bill you. Some practices I've seen, the last business day of the month, the 28th of the month, the first day following an expiration date. Those are some common ones. If you give a specific date, like the 38th, just keep in mind that that could fall on a weekend. What will you do in those cases? So just some of those. Doesn't have to be super complex. In fact, simple is good. The other things that you'll consider is when are you going to do a second attempt? So if you ran the first one on the 28th, how many days are you going to wait before you run the credit cards again in hopes of catching some that maybe just had insufficient funds or something happened that it didn't go through? When's your third attempt? What are you doing after the third attempt? Is there a fourth attempt? At what point do you drop the member, or do you instead invoice them, send out the invoice, and that's your final notice and attempt? So kind of laying out that plan. Barring a few things that I've heard from the processors, I would also say consider some common billing and payroll schedules. So typically a lot of people end up signing up to get things charged on, say, the 15th, or at the beginning. Once they get paid, they have all of their billing due right after that, so they have sufficient funds in the bank. The other part of it is the payroll. So if we assume that most people, or a good percentage of people, are paid on the first of the month or the day before, billing immediately following that can ensure that you do have funds in folks' accounts. So those are some things to consider. Again, it depends on your membership. Another part of preparation has to do with our communication plan. So once we have that schedule in place and making sure that we come up with a good explanation for what this program is, why we're offering it, why they should sign up for it. We also want to, of course, tell the members when we're going to charge them. You don't have to give them the entire schedule, but it is going to be important to tell them that they are signing up for the plan that is going to charge them on the last business day of the month. Putting that clearly on the sign-up form is helpful. Putting it in your reminder emails leading up to billing. Another practice is displaying it very clearly wherever you display their member status online. If they have My Membership and can easily see that they are, one, signed up for auto pay, and then again, your policy is that you're going to bill them on X date. I also make a recommendation at some place on the website. It doesn't have to be everywhere because it can be a little bit longer, but someplace it may be helpful to post actually what your billing schedule is and kind of that explanation, so people do know that you are going to try on one day and that you are going to have some additional attempts going against their card. And then finally, our communication plan always has the emails that we're going to be sending out to our members leading up to the billing. So again, it's that reminder, I'm going to charge you. Here's how to let me know if you want to change that. And then the other plan that we need to have in place is if a credit card fails on that first attempt, what are your communications to go and get that updated information? Are you going to rely on the payment processors if you have that available to you, or are you reaching out to the members? What's that plan look like? So we got our communication plan, and before we run renewals, I find it important to go ahead and do some checks on our data. So one check that we do on our data is when we were setting up a membership, you had the ability to mark something as auto pay, and then also the ability to go ahead and select the payment method. Well, sometimes those can get out of sync. So a user may indicate there's an auto pay, but then remove the payment information because there was an issue with it, or just forgot to uncheck two of them. So you do want to do this kind of little query, and I tried to show it here where it is looking for all the members that are on auto pay, and then it's also looking for individuals or memberships that are on auto pay but don't have a credit card assigned to the membership to charge, because it'll just be a failure later on, so just nip it in the bud now. Oops, I did not mean to hit my click button, sorry. Another thing that you may want to consider checking would be looking at the auto pay method status. So from the payment process, there's an active status, and then after so many failed attempts, it can go to an inactive status. So that is another thing that you want to check. Also, you might want to check expiration dates, especially if you're not getting a credit card updater from your payment processor. So that'll kind of cook into your communication plans to the membership to make sure that you're getting that information updated. And then as a fun little tidbit, while you can see the encrypted or kind of displayed token information about the credit card, if you go back to membership and hit edit, you can also see it from the member profile financial tab. And at the very bottom, there's a customer payment info child form that displays the payment method that's been set up for that membership as well. And in that child form, it is a little bit easier, I think, to see the expiration date as well as the status, and it also shows you the number of attempts. So we had our setups on that side. Another prep before we even really get started is looking at some of our system options. So our very first one is really powerful. It's called the Recognize Revenue During Fulfillment Ignored Failed Credit Cards. Quite possibly one of the longest ones too. This is one we like to disable, and the reason is that we want to make sure that when we run the renewal process, which I know it's talking about RevRec, and that's a little bit confusing, and fulfillment, which has nothing to do with membership, but it's still used in membership. If we run the renewal process, the credit card fails, we want to make sure that netFORUM does not create an invoice for that membership. That's how it's made available to renew a little bit later, to retry the credit card. So we disable it here. Something for your consideration, though, is that if you do have shippable products, you're doing inventory and marking things as shippable, if you are having recognized revenue during fulfillment, you have this ignored failed credit cards, that can impact things as well. So you just want to take that into consideration when you are changing rules around your revenue recognition. And if you have questions about those related to your inventory, feel free to let us know and we can help you on that as well. But sticking with our membership, two additional system options that we need to pay attention to, both of which are system-wide settings. Oops, or system side. Auto pay retry after failure, max attempts. So what this is telling the entire system is you have this credit card going out to Visa 411, our favorite number. How many times is the system going to try and charge that credit card before it considers it an inactive credit card? And generally, I think the default is setting this to about 5 because we don't want to continue to hit the credit card. I believe that can impact your rates, but also might flag some things as well. The other thing that we want to do is looking at our auto pay retry after failure days to wait. And so what this is saying is if I failed on Monday, how many days do I need to wait before, and this is across the system again, how many days do I need to wait until I try that credit card again? So if it's set to 5 and on Monday you ran renewals and then you tried to run the renewals again on Tuesday, this credit card gets skipped. So you do want to consider your auto pay billing schedule when you are setting up the days to wait. bad things happen to good processes, and every once in a while we do have failed credit cards that happen. And this is really a difference in the payment processors depending on where you are. If you're with a processor that has a credit card updater, that can be really helpful to you, and it goes out and it can help get additional information. If you don't, then that's where the communication plan comes in, where I'm looking for expired credit cards and I'm following up with those members on that direct basis. The next part of failed credit cards and when that happens, and I did put in my reminder once again with the same screenshot, you do need to make sure that you're clearing out the memberships from the Get Records process, so that clicking that Remove Records with No Renewal Invoice, click that at the end of the previous cycle, and once you do that, then you can rerun the renewal process, and that's going to again try to invoice and charge those failed memberships again. I debated on whether or not to include this final slide kind of heading into things, and the reason that I'm doing it is primarily just, there's a couple reasons. One, I know that there's some confusion, especially if you're submitting a ticket. It's hard to understand which things we're all talking about, because there have been some new things as far as installment billing and payments are concerned. And so I did want to highlight a little bit of these. Installment billing and installment payment, they are not the same as auto pay membership, but this is kind of a newer topic, so a lot of people will immediately might think that you're talking about this one. So it is important, if you're submitting an issue, just be really clear. This is auto pay membership. I'm going to the membership profile. I'm checking off that checkbox. This is what I expect. To give you a little bit of background on the difference, installment payments technically could be a viable alternative to using auto pay membership, but I think some things need to change and be improved before it is really a super viable alternative. The good part of it is that you don't really need to segment your membership renewals by query. The renewal process will create the performa invoice just like all the others. And then you would need to separately run the process to actually go and charge the credit cards and apply it to that invoice. And so if you have other installment payments, it would get caught up in that, and that can be helpful because then it's cutting down on the processes that you have. The two concerns that I have right now, and I have spoken to folks to see if this might change, but one thing to keep in mind is what I have seen is frequently in the renewal process, the payment schedule gets created for next year, but it doesn't actually advance the dates. So that's a concern. And the dates I'm talking about is on the payment generation schedule. So that's how you would find the payment schedule to actually go ahead and say, hey, task, go charge it. The other part that I would say is membership renewal, especially if your calendar, could be a really big group. And sometimes it's handy, especially when you're talking about payments in a batch, sometimes it's handy to be able to create smaller groupings and to slice them out by different payment method and that sort of thing. And so that's another thing you lose in installment payments. I did include the last one just because it's a little bit of an oldie but a goodie, but totally different than auto pay, and I really wouldn't consider it, is installment orders. And it changes your deferral process. So that's why I kind of wanted to highlight it and say, no, it's totally different. And if you have questions about it, feel free to ping us and we can talk a little bit more. Hopefully this didn't confuse things anymore, but I did want to say they're available. There's a difference. I still like my auto pay membership. To keep it clean, allows more segmentation. It's on membership. Finally, we want to say thank you very much for joining us. I hope I did not speak too quickly. And also invite you to our upcoming webinar. We have one here on data, and so we have a link available for that. I see we have lots of questions.
Hi everyone, this is Lindsay. Just going to be fielding the questions for Kirsten. So first question is, how is the payment applied to the pro forma invoice if you select the auto payment?
So it gets applied when you're in the renewal process. The renewal process magically goes and creates that pro forma invoice and automatically charges the credit card and applies it then. That's why we want to make sure in the renewal process we are pushing off those, putting them into a separate batch, not a pro forma batch, because they won't be pro formas for more than a split second. And auto pay only applies when you're at the renewal.
Okay, thank you. How would we handle renewals at the full rate if first membership purchase was at a discounted rate? How would we handle renewals at the full rate if first membership purchase was at a discounted rate?
So I think that probably falls in line similar. The auto pay shouldn't really be different than how you're doing renewals generally. So if you have a first year that say is $50 and then their second year level, they go up to a $75 if that's kind of the program that you're looking at. When you originally did your membership setup, back on the association profile, you have your membership package, you hit edit on that and you set a renew to package. And when you sell the membership, it's automatically setting that renew to package. So the renewal process is picking up that expected renew to package. But let me know if I misunderstood that one and post something back up.
Okay, the next question was, it was mentioned that a token was stored in the database and not the actual credit card number. Is this true for 2015 or is this only in 2017?
This is true if you're talking, if you have tokenization set up. So the versioning that we're going back is quite wide on this one, so it's not just a 2017 thing. It has to do with your payment processor and making sure that you're set up to do tokenization.
Great, thank you. Next question is this supported by PayPal merchant accounts too?
Yes, it is. Again, the question that you would want to go back to is just making sure that you're comfortable with the tokenization that's happening. And if you don't have tokenization, you might have some credit card encryption in there just to make sure you're clear and understanding of that. But yeah, it's not really a processor. The only processor questions that come into play are really the tokenization decision and whether or not you have updaters. Otherwise, the renewal process, again, has been around before we got into too much of this processor discussion of recent years. And it's really just going out and saying that's the credit card and trying to charge it, just like you were going through centralized order entry and trying to do the renewal.
Okay, great. You mentioned that the eWeb functionality of AutoPay isn't as smooth as the process as iWeb. Can you talk more about that and the difficulties you've seen implementing AutoPay for eWeb?
I would say not so smooth as in it doesn't really exist a lot. Some things are coming out down the way, but if you're already an existing client, you already have eWeb Live, then you would have to apply that functionality into your site, which is still where there's a custom to your site that takes place. But I've seen people do it with relative ease as far as just going in and adding a form to their My Membership page that allows people to go in and say, I'd like to opt in, and then enter their credit card information. It looks very similar to how you see when you were on the edit membership form and you click the add for that credit card information to come in, you can make it a fairly simple form that way. But it does need to get added to eWeb.
Great. I believe that was the last question we have here. Did anyone else have any other questions?
Excellent. We thank you very much. And if anything comes up a little bit later, again, feel free to reach out to us. You have my email. We also have our links on our website to go ahead, and hopefully we'll see you at another upcoming webinar. In addition, you can expect to get kind of a how do we do, and if you have any other ideas for other things you'd like to see similar to this, please let us know. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.